Sandra's phone buzzed at 11:46 p.m., a time when married people were supposed to be sleeping next to their spouses. Her husband was snoring beside her. But curiosity won, and when she picked it up, the message wasn't meant for her. "Good night, baby. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow." She froze. Her heart dropped. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The sender's name wasn't saved, but the words were enough. Sandra had once promised herself she would leave the day she found out he was cheating, and that day had just arrived. Sandra stared into the mirror the next morning, mascara smudged from the tears that came in waves overnight. She whispered to herself, "You're not weak. You're not her." But a part of her broke anyway. Not because she still loved him, but because she had been loyal, dignified, and forgiving for years. And still, it wasn't enough to keep his heart at home. "I saw the message," Sandra said coldly over breakfast. Her husband, Daniel, looked up from his phone, pale. He stuttered, tried to lie, but she just shook her head. "This isn't about the message," she said, standing up. "It's about everything you made me feel, like I wasn't enough. I'm done trying to prove my worth to someone who doesn't see it." She packed a small suitcase, not because she didn't want to take everything, but because she needed to leave fast, without second thoughts. She told her parents she was coming home just for a few days. But deep down, Sandra knew she wasn't going back. That house no longer felt like home. It felt like a graveyard of broken promises. Freedom wasn't immediate joy. It was silence. It was waking up without anyone next to you and wondering if loneliness was better than betrayal. Everyone praised her strength, but no one saw the 2 a.m. sobs or the way her chest ached when she walked past couples holding hands in the street. "I feel like a fool," she confessed to her therapist. "I gave everything. And he gave someone else his nights." The therapist smiled gently. "You weren't a fool for loving. You were brave for leaving when it stopped being love." That sentence wrapped around Sandra like a blanket. She needed to believe it. Sandra joined a yoga class, started journaling, and spent Saturday mornings at a little cafe downtown. She was learning to enjoy her own company, and it felt new, awkward, and wonderful. She wasn't healing perfectly, but she was healing. And that counted. Every small win, not crying when she saw a couple, smiling at strangers again, mattered. 3 months later, her phone rang. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years, Kevin, her college friend. "I heard about what happened. Just wanted to check on you." They talked for hours. Laughed. Reminisced. And for the first time in months, Sandra forgot to check the time, because it didn't feel like surviving anymore. It felt like living. Kevin invited her for coffee. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into late-night walks. There was no rush, just warmth. And Sandra let herself enjoy it, until she learned something that pulled the ground from under her. Kevin was married. Not unhappily, just married. "It's complicated," he said. But betrayal, Sandra knew, was never supposed to be complicated. She should have walked away. She knew what it meant to be on the other side. But instead, she stayed. Just one more call. One more lunch. One more lie to herself. And that's how it started. The same way her husband had once started. With just one more moment of weakness disguised as a connection. Sandra told herself, "I'm not like the others. I'm not ruining anything." He said they haven't loved each other in years. The words tasted bitter, even as she whispered them in the dark. But deep inside, she knew, her ex-husband probably used the same lines. That thought kept her awake at night, yet she didn't stop. The attention felt like medicine for her abandoned heart. They met in secret. Always in corners, in distant cafes, in his car parked under tall trees. Love, if it could be called that, had boundaries now. It couldn't be shared with the world. But forbidden things have a dangerous sweetness. She mistook the thrill for affection, the tension for passion. It felt like being wanted again, until it didn't. Sandra stopped looking at herself in the eye when brushing her teeth. Mirrors made her feel judged by herself. She became an expert at distraction, binge-watching, overworking, and over-smiling. Yet every laugh felt staged. Every quiet moment grew heavier. Guilt was a quiet roommate, always sitting in the corner, watching her every move. One evening, as she waited for Kevin at a hotel lobby, Sandra noticed a young woman crying quietly near the elevator. Her mascara was running. A hotel staff handed her tissues. She didn't know why, but Sandra felt like she was looking at a version of her old self, the one who discovered betrayal and had nowhere to put the pain. That night, the crying girl haunted her. She dreamt of her younger self yelling at her through a mirror, "You promised you'd never become her." She woke up breathless, sweating, and ashamed. But morning came, and with it, a message from Kevin. And she replied like nothing had happened. Kevin left his phone on the table once, and it rang. Sandra stared at it. The caller ID read, Wifey Red Heart Hash. Something in her snapped. The same label she used to have. She didn't answer. But she realized that if Kevin's wife ever found out, she'd feel what Sandra once felt, and Sandra knew exactly how much it would destroy her. I'm not breaking a home. I'm just filling a void, Sandra told her friend Lisa over drinks. Lisa didn't respond. Just gave her a look filled with quiet disappointment. That look hurt more than words. Because Sandra knew Lisa wasn't judging, she was just seeing clearly what Sandra was refusing to admit. Kevin missed their dinner date one night. He texted, sorry, can't make it. It's our wedding anniversary. Family thing. The words hit her like a slap. She had been part of this mess long enough to forget that he had a life that didn't include her. A woman was celebrating a love that was already being poisoned by Sandra. Alone in her apartment, Sandra sat on the floor with a glass of wine and cried harder than she had in months. Not because she missed him, but because she missed herself. She missed the woman who left a cheating husband. Who had standards. Who knew her worth. Now she wasn't sure if she even recognized who she had become. The next time they met, she asked, are you ever leaving her? Kevin hesitated. It's complicated. The same line. The same empty promise. She nodded but felt hollow. That was the moment she finally admitted to herself, she was not his future. She was his escape. Sandra didn't respond to Kevin's next 3 messages. She told herself she was just thinking, but silence was her way of screaming, to herself. She wanted to feel peace again. But peace wouldn't come from another woman's man. It had to come from choosing herself again. She dug out her old journal from before the divorce. One page read, if he ever cheats, I'll walk away. No man will ever reduce me to a secret. Reading her own words felt like a letter from her past self, begging her to come home to the woman she used to be. Breaking up with Kevin wasn't loud. It was a quiet coffee meeting. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. Kevin looked stunned, maybe even hurt. But he didn't beg. That silence told her everything. She had made the right choice, even if it made her heart feel like it was breaking all over again. Days felt slow again. Lonely. But this time, it was different. Loneliness was no longer a punishment, it was a cleanse. She stopped looking for texts that wouldn't come. She stopped imagining what he was doing with someone else. She chose presence over illusion. Sandra joined a women's support circle. They sat in a room with soft light and softer voices. One woman shared a story almost identical to hers. Sandra spoke up, too. For the first time, she didn't justify or lie. I became what I hated, and I hated that most of all, she said, with tears streaming down. Forgiveness didn't come in a moment. It came slowly, like spring after winter. She wrote herself a letter, you were lost. Now you are found. She signed it with love, Sandra, because self-forgiveness starts when you treat yourself with kindness, not punishment. Her therapist invited her to speak at a community event about healing from betrayal. You have a story someone else needs to hear, she said. Sandra hesitated, but agreed. She wasn't proud of everything she had done, but maybe someone could learn from the full, raw truth. On stage, Sandra's voice shook. But she spoke anyway. I left a cheater, and became one's secret. Pain made me desperate for comfort. But comfort without dignity is not love. The room was silent. Then applause. Not because she was perfect, but because she had survived and could finally see herself clearly. She began to invest in herself. Enrolled in an online course. Took solo trips. Created a blog called Lessons from the Other Side. She didn't pretend to be wise. She wrote like someone who had lived, broken, healed, and broken again, and people loved her for it. One reader, Elijah, messaged her through her blog. His message wasn't flirtatious, it was curious. Respectful. Intelligent. And patient. Their conversations weren't built on desire. They were built on shared growth, mutual respect, and honesty. Sandra wasn't rushing. This time, she wanted real. Elijah invited her for coffee. She said yes, but clarified, I'm not looking to fill a void. I'm just learning to live with myself first. He smiled and said, that's exactly the kind of person I want to get to know. There were no lies, no secrets. Just two people trying to understand who they were, without rushing into who they could be together. They talked about everything, including the parts Sandra used to hide. She told him about Kevin. About her ex-husband. About how she betrayed herself more than anyone. Elijah didn't flinch. "You're not what you did. You're what you chose after," he said. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not judged. One afternoon, she saw Kevin at the mall. He was with his wife, holding her hand, smiling like everything was fine. He didn't notice Sandra. But she noticed something about herself. She didn't feel angry anymore. There was no urge to run. No heartbreak. Just a quiet sense of closure. She walked past them like she was walking out of a memory that no longer defined her. Out of nowhere, Daniel, her ex-husband, messaged her, "I heard you've been doing talks. I just want to say I'm proud of you. And sorry again." She read it twice. Then smiled. She didn't reply, not out of spite, but because she didn't owe him anything anymore. Some chapters don't need a reply. They just need an ending. Love wasn't excitement anymore. It was calm. Respect. A shared joke at midnight, a safe space to say hard things. Elijah never rushed her. He often said, "Take your time. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to walk beside you." She believed him. And that belief was new, and rare, and sacred. One of Sandra's blog posts, titled "How I Became Her, and How I Forgave Myself," exploded online. Thousands shared it. Comments poured in. Women from around the world told her, "You just told my story." Sandra wept, not because she was famous now, but because she knew her pain had finally served a purpose. Her mother called. "I read your blog," she said softly. "I'm proud. You broke the cycle." Sandra hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. Her mom added, "My mother stayed. I stayed. But you walked away. And then you found your way back to yourself. That takes courage." Some days still hurt. A song, a place, an old memory could trigger tears. Healing wasn't a straight line. But now she gave herself grace. She journaled not to fix things, but to observe them. To let feelings pass through instead of burying them. Her emotional fluency had matured. Elijah asked her one evening, "What are we?" She smiled. "We're two people who've stopped pretending we have all the answers." He laughed. "That's a good start." They didn't label it. They didn't need to. Whatever they were becoming was growing in truth, not illusion. And that felt like real love. On the anniversary of her divorce, Sandra didn't cry. She lit a candle. Not in mourning, but in gratitude. Gratitude for every version of herself that walked through fire. She whispered to the flame, "Thank you for breaking me. Thank you for remaking me." And just like that, she was whole again. Sandra was invited to speak at a major women's conference. Standing on stage, she looked out at the sea of faces, women hoping to find themselves in her story. Her voice didn't shake this time. "We are not only what's been done to us. We are also what we do after." The audience rose in applause, but it was the silence before that meant more. Weeks later, she received a letter, unsigned. But it was clear. Kevin's wife had found her blog. "I cried through every word. I know now what I didn't want to know." Sandra's hands trembled. She wanted to say sorry. But the woman didn't ask for that. The letter ended, "I left him. And I found myself too." That was enough. Elijah surprised her one quiet evening. No grand gestures, just a small velvet box and a trembling voice. "Not because I need you. But because I love the woman you've become." Sandra stared at the ring. Not for the sparkle, but for what it symbolized, a love that had nothing to do with secrets. Just the truth. Pure and slow. She said yes. But not like in the movies. There were no tears. Just peace. The kind of yes you whisper when you know you're finally ready. Later that night, she wrote, "This isn't the end of a love story. It's the beginning of an honest one." She was interviewed for national TV. The anchor said, "You turned pain into power." Sandra smiled. "No. I turned confusion into clarity. And that's how I got free." Her words rippled through the screen. Because they were not polished. They were real. Just like her journey. But fame has shadows. Some comments online attacked her. "You were a homewrecker. Don't pretend to be a saint." Sandra read them all, and didn't hide. She replied once, "I've never claimed sainthood. Only accountability. And healing doesn't require permission from those who only watched, never walked." Then she logged off. A publisher reached out, "We want your story in print." Sandra cried, called Elijah, then opened a blank document titled, She called it Betrayal, then became it. She poured every truth into those pages, the shame, the silence, the rising. Not for sympathy. But for the woman she once was, and those still there. One night, Elijah admitted something. I was cheated on once, too. That's why I understood your pain. He had scars, too. They sat in silence, holding hands. Trauma wasn't a competition. It was a shared language. And that night, they spoke it fluently. Marriage wasn't a fantasy. It was work. Boundaries. Choices. Healing. Some days were tense. Others joyful. But they chose each other every day. Sandra often said, we are not perfect. But we're honest. And that's a revolution in itself. On her wedding day, Sandra looked into the mirror. This time, she didn't avoid her reflection. She whispered, you came back to me. Thank you. No makeup could cover the glow of self-respect. That day, she didn't just marry Elijah. She married her new self. As they stood before friends and family, Elijah read his vows. I love you, not just for who you are, but for everything you had to overcome to be her. Sandra's eyes welled with tears. She didn't read her vows off paper. She spoke to them from memory, from the scars and strength within. I promise honesty, even when it's hard. I promise presence, even when it's uncomfortable. And I promise to never become a stranger to myself again. They didn't travel to an exotic island. They went to a small cabin in the hills, surrounded by silence and stars. There were no luxury spas, only conversations and rest. It was the most peaceful she had felt in years. Every sunset reminded her, healing isn't a destination. It's a way of living, slowly, deeply, with eyes open. Her memoir launched to a full bookstore. Women lined up, some crying before they even spoke. You told the truth I was too afraid to admit, one whispered. Sandra held her hand and replied, you're not alone anymore. She signed each book with a simple phrase, your story matters. Even the broken chapters. One night, she became overwhelmed, the book, the noise, the expectations. Elijah noticed, held her hand, and said, let's unplug. Let's go back to who we are when no one's watching. He didn't want her public image. He loved the woman who loved books, tea, silence, and purpose. That reminder grounded her again. Out of the blue, Lisa, the friend who once gave her the silent look of disappointment, messaged, coffee? They hadn't spoken in a year. They met. Lisa said, I judged you before I understood your pain. I'm sorry. Sandra smiled. I forgave you before I blamed you. I just needed space to remember who I was. At one of Sandra's healing workshops, a teenage girl shared, my mom is going through what you went through. I came to understand her better. Sandra hugged her gently and whispered, you're already part of the healing. You showed up. That moment reminded her that the impact of healing echoes through generations. The anniversary of the affair's discovery came again. This time, she lit no candle. She simply took a walk and let the wind remind her that time doesn't heal, growth does. She passed the same cafe where Kevin had once kissed her hand in secret. She didn't flinch. She simply walked on. Powerfully. Silently. Free. Sandra quietly supported women going through similar storms. Not as a savior, but as someone who'd walked the fire barefoot. She never gave advice. Only her presence. Because sometimes, being seen without shame is all a person needs to begin healing. She wrote, Dear Sandra, you didn't ruin anything. You were hurting. You were human. And you were brave enough to make it right. I'm proud of you. Love, me. She read it aloud to herself. It was the closure she never knew she needed, the permission to stop punishing herself and just live. In the quiet of her home, barefoot in pajamas, stirring soup for Elijah, she realized, this is it. This is healing. This is joy. Not the stage. Not the applause. But the stillness. The honesty. The ability to look in the mirror and smile with no secrets left behind her eyes. While shopping for groceries, a woman stopped Sandra near the produce aisle. You don't know me, but I read your book. You saved me. Sandra didn't know what to say at first. But her eyes softened. No, you saved yourself. I just reminded you it was possible. They hugged like old friends. Two survivors. No need for names. On a rainy day, Sandra saw a woman crying at a bus stop. Her instinct told her not to walk past. She sat beside her, offered tissues, and listened. I just found out he's been lying, the woman said. Sandra didn't give advice. Just nodded slowly and said, that pain you're in? It won't last. But it will teach you who you are. Sandra sat by her desk again, this time to write a new story, not about betrayal, but about becoming. The Other Side of Forgiveness was the title. She didn't write to explain anymore. She wrote to create space for healing, for silence, for those ready to begin again, just like she once did. Elijah walked in one evening holding a soft yellow baby blanket. "I saw this today and thought, maybe we're ready?" Sandra stared at it, heart full and trembling. They weren't trying. But they weren't afraid anymore either. She placed the blanket on her lap and whispered, "Yes. Let's try for something new. Something innocent." With every month that passed, Sandra felt both excitement and fear. Could she become a mother, carrying all that she had carried? Would she be enough? Elijah reassured her gently, "Your story will be your child's strength, not their burden." And with that, she began to believe that wounds could become wisdom passed down with love. One morning, the test showed 2 pink lines. Her hands shook. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from fear, but from awe. Life was growing where pain once lived. She held the test to her chest and whispered, "You're coming into a heart that's been rebuilt. You'll be safe here." The past was still part of her, but it would not raise her child. At a literary panel, Kevin appeared on stage. He had written his own book about regret. When their eyes met, he gave her a nod. No words. Just quiet respect. Afterward, he approached her. "Thank you for breaking it off when you did," he said. "I'm not proud of anything, but I'm better now." She smiled and replied, "Then maybe some good came of it." Years later, her daughter found Sandra's first book. "Mom, is this you?" she asked, eyes wide. Sandra took a deep breath. "Yes. It's who I was. It's part of how I became who I am." Her daughter didn't flinch. She hugged her tightly and said, "I love your story, Mom. It makes me brave." And that was all Sandra ever wanted, to turn shame into strength. On a summer afternoon, it rained without warning. Instead of running for shelter, Sandra took off her shoes and danced in the street. Elijah and their daughter joined her. They laughed like children. Because sometimes healing looks like silliness, like bare feet on wet pavement, like joy that doesn't need permission anymore. Sandra revisited her old neighborhood. She stood outside the house she once left in heartbreak. But now, it didn't sting. It felt like a closed book on a full shelf. She whispered, "Thank you for the pain. You introduced me to myself." Then she walked away, not as a victim or villain, but as a woman who finally came home to her truth. Sandra was invited to teach a guest class on resilience at a local university. The students expected the theory. Instead, she offered stories. Real ones. Hers. She said, "Strength isn't what you show the world. It's the choice to rise quietly after you've fallen alone. I fell. I stayed down. But I stood again. And that counts more than perfection." On her birthday, Elijah gave her a single envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from her daughter. "Mom, you're my favorite story. The one where the hero finds herself." Sandra wept, not because she was emotional, but because that little girl saw her clearly. Not by her past, but by her courage to keep walking forward. Lisa confessed over lunch, "I'm in a situation like yours, back then. I don't know what to do." Sandra didn't judge. She simply listened. Then she held Lisa's hand and said, "Only you know when enough is enough. But remember, no love built in silence ever gives you your voice back." Lisa nodded through tears. Sandra suffered a miscarriage. It shattered her. The nursery plans, the hopes, the names whispered at night, gone. Elijah held her through the grief. She whispered, "Why does loss keep finding me?" He answered gently, "Because you have the strength to turn loss into light. Again and again." Months later, Sandra reopened her women's circle. This time, she shared the grief of miscarriage. The rawness. The ache. She said, "Healing isn't about getting over things. It's about holding sorrow and still reaching for joy. It's about choosing to keep loving even when life breaks your heart." She wrote Kevin's wife a letter, one filled with truth, regret, and respect. She never mailed it. She didn't need to. Writing it was her release. Sometimes closure doesn't come through confrontation, but through finally saying what your soul needed to say, even if only to the page. Sandra read her daughter bedtime stories each night. One night, her daughter asked, "Can you tell me one of your stories?" She smiled and said, "Once there was a woman who thought she lost herself. But life kept whispering, 'Come back.' So she did." Her daughter fell asleep with a smile. On her wedding anniversary with Elijah, there was no big party. Just a quiet dinner at home, jazz playing in the background, their daughter drawing at the table. Sandra looked around and whispered, I used to think survival was the victory. But this piece, is the true prize. Elijah took her hand. We made it. She received a message from a woman in Kenya. Your story gave me the courage to leave a secret relationship. I'm studying now. I feel alive again. Sandra smiled. Healing had gone global. Her pain had purpose. And that purpose now had a passport and a ripple that could never be undone. Sandra began writing letters to her daughter for different stages of life: first love, heartbreak, betrayal, becoming a mother. One letter read, if you ever make a mistake, forgive yourself quickly. You don't have to stay in shame. You are allowed to change, and come back stronger. One evening, her daughter came home crying. He said he loved me, but he was texting someone else. Sandra's chest tightened with memory. She held her close. You didn't deserve that. And this pain? It won't define you. It will refine you. In that moment, Sandra didn't just comfort her daughter, she comforted the girl she used to be. Years into their marriage, Sandra found a letter Elijah had hidden in her journal. I fell in love with you in your brokenness, but I stayed in love with the woman you built from the rubble. She wept softly. Not from sadness, but from recognition. She was finally seen fully, not for who she had to be, but for who she dared to become. At a National Women's Summit, Sandra was awarded for transformative impact through storytelling. The presenter said, she didn't just write a story. She rewrote her identity, and invited us to do the same. As she accepted the award, Sandra said, I once believed shame was the end of my story. But now I know, honesty is how stories begin again. An anonymous comment on her blog read, you broke another woman's home. That pain doesn't just vanish. Sandra stared at it for minutes. She didn't delete it. Instead, she replied, you're right. Pain leaves traces. I live with mine daily. But I've turned those ashes into something that helps others breathe again. Sandra visited her old therapist, now retired. They shared tea in silence. You look lighter, the therapist said. I think I finally stopped trying to be the hero in my own story, Sandra replied. I just let myself be human. And in that simple admission, healing deepened once more. At a sunny park, Sandra, Elijah, and their daughter lay on a picnic blanket. No phones. No noise. Just laughter, fruit, and wind. Her daughter leaned on her shoulder. This is my favorite kind of day. Sandra smiled. Mine too. There was nothing extraordinary about it, except the peace that now came so easily. Sandra found a box of old letters, photos, and one of Kevin's old gifts. She held it for a second, then placed it into a letting go pile. She didn't need souvenirs from a version of herself she no longer carried. Her story didn't need reminders. Her life was the living proof of growth. Sandra visited a high school and asked the students one question: have you ever made a choice you regret, but learned from? Every hand went up. She said, then you're already wiser than you think. Mistakes don't ruin us. Shame does. Learn. Stand. And speak. That's how we grow. The applause was quiet but full of understanding. Her daughter performed a monologue for her school play. It ended with the line, even when the world breaks you, you can become someone stronger than your story. Sandra wiped a tear. That line wasn't just art, it was a reflection of what had been passed down. Not just pain, but power. One evening, Sandra sat on her porch with Elijah. He held her hand and said, if I ever leave this world first, I want you to keep telling your truth. Don't ever go quiet. Sandra nodded. You won't just live in my memories. You'll live in every woman I help heal. It wasn't a farewell, just the planting of a promise. Years later, Sandra stood before her final group of students. Her voice had aged, but her spirit hadn't faded. Stories don't end when you close the book. They live in the ones who heard them. The room was silent. She ended with, I once became what I feared. But that was just a chapter. Not the whole book. The students rose, clapping, not just for a teacher, but for a survivor. After a long break, Sandra returned to her writing desk. This time, she wasn't writing about pain or healing. She was writing fiction, stories of girls who fought dragons, women who saved themselves. It wasn't about her anymore. That, in itself, was a sign of full circle healing, when you no longer have to write from your wounds, but from your wisdom. Elijah was diagnosed with a slow but irreversible condition. Sandra didn't cry in the doctor's office, not because she was numb, but because she knew how to hold sorrow now. At home, she sat beside him. We'll walk this together, she said. And when you can't walk, I'll carry the love for both of us. In the quiet of their porch, they watched the sun set every evening. Elijah said one night, "We built something holy from broken things." Sandra nodded. "We did. Not by being perfect, but by choosing each other in the silence." The last light of the day bathed them both in gold. Her daughter got into university abroad. Sandra helped her pack, folded her clothes, tucked in handwritten notes between pages of books. On the night before her departure, they sat on the edge of her bed. "You gave me strength without hiding your scars, Mom," she whispered. Sandra replied, "I didn't want you to be perfect. I wanted you to be whole." Years passed, and Elijah's time came. He passed in peace, at home, with Sandra holding his hand and reading to him from her first book. Afterward, she sat alone on the porch, looking up at the stars. "Thank you," she whispered to the night sky. "You taught me that love, when honest, never dies." Now older, gray-haired but vibrant, Sandra walked through the same cafe where her story once began. No one recognized her. But she smiled at the waiter, tipped big, and left quietly. She no longer needed to be seen to feel valuable. Her worth was no longer borrowed from others. She was finally her own. At a community storytelling night, Sandra listened instead of speaking. Women shared their stories, some joyful, some shattered, all real. One younger woman approached her after. "You don't know me, but your book changed my life." Sandra smiled. "Then my pain was worth it." Sandra wrote a final letter. It wasn't to anyone else. It was to the universe. "I made mistakes. I grew. I loved. I left. I returned. I made peace. I lived." She folded it into a small notebook and tucked it under her pillow, her last message to the world, gentle and whole. Sandra passed peacefully, surrounded by love. Her daughter found her notebook and read the final entry. She smiled through her tears. Later, she stood before a crowd at her mother's memorial and said, "My mom used to say, you can fall and still rise. You can betray yourself, and still come home." She didn't die ashamed. She died free. Moral of the story: redemption doesn't come from avoiding mistakes, it comes from facing them, growing through them, and using them to light the path for others. Even when we become what we once feared, we still have the power to return to who we were meant to be.